Ever wonder which songs tarnished the king's legacy? Could a few poor song choices have damaged the reputation of rock and roll's greatest icon? Elvis Presley remains one of the most iconic figures in music history, with a catalog spanning hundreds of songs across various genres. But not every track was a winner. While Elvis is remembered for classics like Suspicious Minds and Can't Help Falling in Love, some of his recordings had been criticized by fans and music historians alike for damaging his artistic credibility. These musical missteps occurred primarily during specific phases of his career when commercial interests sometimes overshadowed artistic integrity. Number 1. Old MacDonald, 1967. Did Elvis really record a children's nursery rhyme at the height of the psychedelic era? In 1967, while revolutionary bands like the Beatles were releasing Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and the Doors were debuting with Light My Fire, Elvis Presley found himself recording Old MacDonald for the soundtrack of the film Double Trouble. The timing couldn't have been worse. As rock music was evolving into complex artistic expressions dealing with social issues and experimentation, Elvis was singing about farm animals. The recording came during a problematic phase of Elvis's career when his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, had him starring in a string of formulaic movies with equally formulaic soundtracks. Old MacDonald represented everything that was going wrong with Elvis's career at that point. It was childish, commercially calculated, and completely disconnected from the cutting-edge music of the era. Music journalist Dave Marsh once wrote that this recording made it virtually impossible for anyone under 30 to take Elvis seriously. The contrast between Elvis singing Old MacDonald and the revolutionary music being produced by his contemporaries created a credibility gap that would take years for him to overcome. The track featured an up-tempo arrangement with backup singers enthusiastically joining in on the animal sounds, which only added to its kitsch factor. Elvis himself seemed to be going through the motions, his powerful voice reduced to singing lines about ducks and pigs. For fans who had grown up with the dangerous hip-swiveling rock and roller of the 1950s, this recording felt like a betrayal of everything Elvis had once represented. When radio stations were playing grounding music that addressed the tumultuous social climate of the 1960s, Old MacDonald made Elvis seem irrelevant and out of touch. It became a symbol of how far the king had fallen from his throne, trapped in Hollywood productions that stifled his authentic musical expression. Number 2. No Room to Rhumba in a Sports Car, 1963. Can you imagine Elvis singing about the challenges of dancing in a small vehicle? The 1963 movie Fun in Acapulco gave us this peculiar track that had Elvis contemplating the spatial limitations of performing Latin dances in compact automobiles. The song's premise was as ridiculous as its title suggests, and it exemplified the creative bankruptcy that plagued many of Elvis's movie soundtracks during the 1960s. No Room to Rhumba in a Sports Car featured lyrics like, "There's no room to rumba in a sports car, too bumpy to samba in a Jeep," delivered with a straight face by the king of rock and roll. For a man who had once shocked America with his raw sexuality and revolutionary sound, singing about the impracticality of dancing in various vehicles was a dramatic fall from grace. Music historians point to songs like this as evidence of Elvis's willingness to record nearly anything his management put in front of him during his movie years. Between 1960 and 1968, Elvis released dozens of soundtrack albums filled with songs that chronotized fitting a movie scene over musical quality. Peter Gurinick, one of Elvis's most respected biographers, noted that songs like No Room to Rhumba in a Sports Car represented the nadir of Elvis's artistic expression. The track received little radio play and has been largely forgotten, except as an example of how far Elvis's material could stray from his rock and roll roots. What made this song particularly damaging to Elvis's reputation was that it came at a time when he could have been competing with emerging British invasion bands. While the Beatles were beginning their ascent with substantive rock music, Elvis was recording novelty tunes about dancing in cars. This stark contrast contributed to the perception that Elvis was no longer a serious artist, but rather a movie star who occasionally sang. The production quality of the track didn't help matters. With its dated arrangement and forced Latin flavor, No Room to Rhumba in a Sports Car sounded formulaic and uninspired. Even Elvis's vocal performance lacked the conviction and energy that had characterized his earlier work. It was as though he knew the material was beneath him, but was fulfilling a contractual obligation. Number 3. Song of the Shrimp, 1962. Would you believe Elvis once sang a ballad from the perspective of a shrimp? In what might be the strangest entry in Elvis's catalog, Song of the Shrimp had the king adopting the point of view of a crustacean facing its mortality. Featured in the 1962 film Girls, 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 this bizarre narrative follows the journey of the shrimp from the ocean to a fishing net, to presumably someone's dinner plate. With lyrics like "Born in the sea, so wild and free in the deep blue sea was I, till I was caught in a fisherman's net, and that was the day I knew I would die." The song presented a morbid tale that seemed completely at odds with Elvis's rock and roll persona. The track even featured Elvis making bubbling sounds to simulate underwater noises, a far cry from his rebellious image of the 1950s. Rock critic Grail Marcus famously singled out Song of the Shrimp as representative of the artistic purgatory Elvis endured during his movie years. In his influential book, Mystery Train, Marcus wrote that songs like this turned Elvis Presley, once the most dangerous performer in America, into a punchline. The song's arrangement, featuring a quasi-Hawaiian musical backing and a children's choir echoing the Song of the Shrimp refrain, only added to its peculiarity. Elvis delivered the lyrics with surprising sincerity, which somehow made the whole enterprise even more awkward. One can only imagine what fans who discovered Elvis through Heartbreak Hotel or Jailhouse Rock thought when they heard him singing from a shrimp's perspective. Song of the Shrimp received virtually no radio play and exists today primarily as a curiosity that Elvis complicists acknowledge with embarrassment. Music historian Colin Scott notes that songs like this damaged Elvis's standing in the emerging counterculture and contributed to his image as an establishment figure disconnected from the evolving music scene. What makes this song particularly tragic in retrospect is that Elvis recorded it the same year Ray Charles released his Groundring, modern sounds in country and western music, and just months before the Beatles released their first single. While his contemporaries were pushing boundaries and evolving musically, Elvis was recording novelty songs about anthropomorphized seafood. The legacy of Song of the Shrimp extends beyond just being a bad song. It represents a period when one of music's most influential figures was completely detached from the musical revolution happening around him, trapped in a commercial machine that prioritized movie tie-ins over artistic integrity. Number 4. Do the Clam, 1965. How did the king end up instructing teens on a non-existent beach dance? By 1965, the dance craze phenomenon had already given us the twist, the mashed potato, and countless other fad moves. Elvis's contribution. Do the Clam, a made-up dance created solely for a scene in the movie Girl Happy. The song instructed listeners on how to perform this fictional dance move with lyrics like, "Do the clam, do the clam, grab your barefoot baby by the hand." While contemporaries like the Beatles were releasing Help, and Bob Dylan was going electric with Like a Rolling Stone, Elvis was singing about a dance that didn't exist outside his movie. The fabricated nature of the song highlighted how Elvis's music had become a vehicle for promoting his films, rather than a genuine artistic expression. Do the Clam exemplified Elvis's disconnect from the rapidly evolving music scene of the mid-1960s. The British invasion was in full swing, folk rock was emerging as a powerful new genre, and Motown was producing sophisticated soul music. Against this backdrop, Elvis's beach movie soundtrack songs seemed increasingly irrelevant and commercially calculated. Music journalist Nick Tossius wrote that songs like Do the Clam represented the nadir of rock and roll's first great voice. The track featured a generic arrangement typical of Elvis's movie songs from this period, competent but uninspired musicianship, backing vocals that sounded more like an easy listening record than rock and roll, and production values that prioritized clarity over rawness or innovation. What made Do the Clam particularly damaging to Elvis's credibility was that it came at a time when his early rock and roll peers who were still active, like Chuck Berry, were being embraced by a new generation for their authenticity. Meanwhile, Elvis was appearing in lightweight beach movies, performing contrived dances, creating a perception that he had sold out his rebellious roots. The song reached pound 21 on the Billboard Hot 100, but has been largely forgotten, except as an example of Elvis's creative wilderness years. Even dedicated Elvis fans tend to skip over this track when revisiting his catalog. Music historian John Kovac has noted that Do the Clam represents the lowest common denominator approach to pop music that characterized many of Elvis's soundtrack recordings. Perhaps most telling was Elvis's own apparent disinterest in the material. In studio outtakes from this period, Elvis can occasionally be heard making jokes about the quality of the songs he was recording. According to several biographers, he privately expressed frustration with the material, but continued to record it at the insistence of Colonel Parker, who prioritized movie deals over musical integrity. Number 5. Yoga is as yoga does. 1967. Could anything be more out of touch than Elvis mocking yoga during the counterculture era? In 1967, as Eastern spirituality was becoming a serious influence on Western culture and music, Elvis recorded Yoga is as Yoga Does for the soundtrack of the film Easy Come, Easy Go. The song treated yoga as a joke, featuring lyrics that mocked the practice at precisely the moment when many young people were embracing Eastern philosophy and meditation. With lines like, "Yoga is as yoga does, and you can tie yourself in knots," the song displayed a stunning disconnect from the cultural moment. While the Beatles were studying with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and incorporating Indian influences into their music, Elvis was releasing a novelty song that treated yoga as a silly contortion exercise rather than a spiritual practice. Music critic Lester Bangs once cited this song as evidence that Elvis had completely surrendered to the most banal commercial instincts. The contrast between Elvis mocking Eastern spirituality while other major artists were seriously engaging with it highlighted how far he had drifted from the cultural vanguard. The song's arrangement featured an awkward attempt at incorporating Indian-sounding instrumentation, which only made the mockery more pronounced. Elvis delivered the lyrics with a campy vocal style that suggested he knew the material was beneath him, but was going through the motions anyway. The result was a performance that sounded more like a parody than genuine music. Yoga is as Yoga Does never charted and remains one of the least remembered songs in Elvis's vast catalog. However, its existence speaks volumes about the creative direction of Elvis's career during this period. While his contemporaries were exploring new sounds and embracing the counterculture, Elvis was stuck making films and recording soundtracks that actively mocked the changing times. Priscilla Presley later revealed that Elvis actually had a genuine interest in Eastern spirituality and self-improvement books, making this recording even more ironic. Behind the scenes, Elvis was reportedly exploring many of the same spiritual concepts he was mocking on record, trapped in a public persona that wasn't allowed to evolve with the times. Music historian Alana Nash has written that songs like Yoga is as Yoga Does represented the greatest tragedy of Elvis's career, the gap between what he was capable of as an artist and what he was permitted to record. This disconnect would continue until his 1968 comeback special, which finally allowed Elvis to break free from the formula that had produced these credibility-damaging recordings. The damage done by songs like these was substantial, but not permanent. When given the opportunity to reconnect with his musical roots in the 1968 comeback special, Elvis proved he was still a formidable and relevant artist. His final years produced classic recordings like Suspicious Minds and In the Ghetto that restored much of his credibility. But can we ever fully separate the Elvis of Jailhouse Rock from the Elvis of Song of the Shrimp? Do these musical missteps diminish his legacy, or do they simply make his story more complex and human?